Hi, welcome to this tutorial to how to make this conical peg bag. So first of all, you're going to need to make your pattern piece. Now I'm using a piece of A3 paper here. You can make this smaller or larger. First of all, I folded it in half and I'm taking that line there as my first measurement. It works out at 13 3/4 inches. So I've marked that there on my ruler just so I know when I move it around. I want to find the 30-degree line on my ruler. I've found the 45-degree line there. I actually needed the 30-degree. And then I want to also draw from that point 11 3/4 inches. I'm going to need to do that one more time. Now you will notice that it's not quite big enough, this piece of paper. So I'm just going to do the line and then I'll stick on some extra bits shortly. So just still drawing that line. And then I'm going to do that on the other side. So flipping my ruler over, taking the 30-degree line along that center line and using the side of the ruler, 11 3/4 inches, and drawing the line. And then I need to do that second line again. So you do end up with 5 lines for whatever measurement you're using. They all need to be the same length. So here we go, we can see now that I've stuck some bits of paper on there, so I'm just going to continue those lines. Obviously you can go smaller, so you can do it all on one piece of paper, but I do think that just about 12 inches is the right sort of size if you want to get a fair amount of pegs in your bag. So just finishing off those lines there. As you can see, I'm now going to connect the lines. Now the easiest way I found to do this is to actually take your whole piece that you've created and to fold it in half again along that line. But you'll need to be able to see the line, so you're going to fold it the other way and simply draw a line and connect the 2 dots and then trim off that excess. Then we know that it's going to be exactly the same on both sides. I didn't find any tape, so I've stapled this together, so it's not the most stable of pattern pieces, but if you just use some tape, that'll be absolutely fine. So cut along the outside line as well, and when you open this up, you'll have a nice, not a semicircle, it's slightly smaller than a semicircle. So get rid of all my bits of rubbish, and then open that out, and that is the perfect pattern piece. So it's like a semicircle, but it's got a segment missing. So now what we need to do is find out where we're going to put the circle, so that's the opening. I measured just about halfway between and I made a little mark, and then I'm going to place one of my mugs over the top of that mark. So basically all we're doing really is sort of trying to find the centre. It's not completely accurate. If you want to be completely accurate, then you'll be needing a compass, but I'm just going to draw around this and I think that looks absolutely fine. So I'm going to cut that piece out now because I won't need that. Opening that out, I did go a little bit bigger. I didn't think the gap was quite big enough. So now you need to place this onto your fabric. You need a piece in outer fabric, lining fabric, and interfacing. I used a fusible fleece for this and I think it works really, really well. Now after you've cut those out, we're going to need to make the tab that's going to sit at the top of the piece that's going to hold your hook. So you need to cut a piece of fabric. I've chosen the same fabric that I'm using for my binding. So this is a 2.5 inch by 5 inch strip. I'm going to fold that in half. Then I'm going to open it out and fold the edges in like so, and then fold it all up again. So you've got a really, really strong bit of fabric. I'm going to give that a press so it keeps everything neat. These little irons are quite super for this job, and if you've got a wool pressing mat, again, really, really good. I'm going to use 1/4 inch just shy and stitch that together and chop off all of my threads. And there's my hook there. I'm just going to bring the ruler in so you can see it's about 2 inches in length, and it's just one of those lovely little hooks, and I'm just going to lay that together, place the 2 ends together, and then I'm just going to pin, so I've just got it together. It's not vital that you do this step, but it just means for my sake it keeps everything together, and I like to work that way. Right, so now I'm going to place my outer fabric onto my fusible fleece. and it sits in just about nicely. My cutting isn't ideal. I couldn't find my proper scissors, so it's not the best cutting ever, but it will certainly do. So using my iron, I'm just going to adhere that on. Lovely, lovely, lovely and nice and flat. Now I want to take my lining fabric and I'm going to place that face down onto my outer fabric. Now, it's best to pin around the circle. That's the only bit we're really focusing on at the moment, but you don't want to go too close to the circle. Just pinning all those layers together. And we're going to stitch that circle. I use just slightly bigger than 1/4 inch because you do need to snip into this. So here it comes. Here's the stitching. Not the best stitching in the world, but I've used a dark thread so you can see what I've done. Now I'm going to snip this. I've sped up the process because it's pretty boring. So you're going to snip around this circle here so that when you flip through, it becomes a really nice line. So there we go. And now I'm going to take that lining fabric and all I'm doing is tucking it through the hole, round to the back of the piece like that, flipping it over and then pulling it out and just manipulating a little bit. And you will find that it sits really, really nicely if you've snipped. So as you can see, without even pressing, that is a beautiful, beautiful circle. So flipping it round, and then I will give that a nice press. And I think that looks really smashing. We do want to now top stitch those layers together around that circle. So I've just flipped it over and pressed the back as well so that everything's together. You can, of course, pin the layers before you top stitch, but as you know, I'm not precious with my pins. So that's it all top stitched together. I think it looks really, really smart. So now we want to move on to making the base. Now the best way I found of making the base is to pin or quilting clip those raw edges together so you've got the circle shape, pull it out as far as it will go on the bottom and simply draw around that circle. I did 1/2 here so that I could just flip it over. I realised it was a bit egg shaped, so I just adjusted it slightly. Flip that piece over and just cut it across on that fold so that you've got relatively the size you're looking for. This can be adjusted as you stitch together, so don't worry too much. So now you want a piece of this in your outer, your lining and your interfacing. Just popping that on the top again just to make sure it fits, and yet it does look like it's a pretty good fit. So cutting out those bits, and you want to layer them together again like we've done before. This sandwich is the wadding, then the fabric right side up. I'm using a fusible fleece again, so I'm just ironing that on. And then I have used a stick and spray for this one. I haven't quilted this, but of course you can do if you want to. So just using a fair amount of stick and spray there and putting on the lining fabric. Lovely, and then you're going to just baste all the way around the outside of that. Now I have quilted this panel. I don't know if you can see, but I've just done simple lines. I do think it looks quite effective. Now on the outer side, we're going to place our strip. So if you can see there, I just used a quilting clip to keep it in position, and then we're going to stitch along that edge. So I'm just going to pull on that clip and just make sure it sits really nicely, and it's what I'm looking for. So pull it through, and I'm pleased with how that looks. Lovely, but also you can see the raw edge, of course, inside, so we're going to need to cover that raw edge, and we want to do that with a bit of binding. Now, dependent on how big your cone is will depend on the size strip of binding, but you're looking for a 2.5 inch wide strip, as you would normally do with binding. So I've just used the side of the fat quarter, cut off a 2.5 inch strip, and I know that that will be too big, but I can trim it to size. So I simply want to fold that in half and press. Beautiful. And then bringing in my project, I'm laying that raw edge, and I'm just going to lay that raw edge against there like that, and then just trim it slightly to size. You do want a bit of overhang, and then you're going to stitch along that edge. Just get rid of those threads, and then you're going to flip over that binding. A few more threads there. Flip over the binding, bring in your iron, so that's a lovely finish. Make sure your iron's turned on. Press and then flip that back. Now I'm going to stitch in the ditch for this. You can hand stitch this if you would like to. It's entirely up to you. I do think a hand stitch looks neater, but for the purpose of this I've just stitched in the ditch. So I flipped it over, quilting clipped, and then I'm just going to stitch along that line so it joins all those layers together and hides that seam. So there we go. I'm really pleased with how that looks. Lovely. And I'm going to pull it now right side out. Just making sure everything's nice, and then that strip of fabric down the centre there I think really looks nice, and I do think I will just hand stitch that down a bit. I'm a bit of a perfectionist with this because you can see it, but it's up to you. Now we want to join on the base, so we want to make sure we're doing those linings together, so we've got the raw edge facing out because we're going to make a nice statement with the binding. So you want to use a bit of bias binding for this. I've just basted that together so it's easier for me to handle. So using a piece of bias binding, do have a look on YouTube for tutorials on how to cut your own. We're going to fold the bias binding in half and stitch it all around the outside edge and just tucking in the end edge into the beginning. And then we're going to flip that over and we will hand stitch this into place. I certainly find hand stitching for this is a lot easier and it will make a neater finish. So here we go. Here is my peg basket hanging up in front of my house. I hope you've enjoyed this video. Thank you so much for watching, and I'll see you on the next one.